Hey, hey, and welcome to the third official episode, I should say, after the official launch of my After Hours podcast. I am Tiffany Apan, and thank you so much for tuning in. And number one, I really hope you enjoyed first of all, the soft launch episodes that coincided with my YouTube channels, the After Hours YouTube channels, 31 Days of Halloween, did a little soft launch of the After Hours podcast and officially launched it on Halloween with special guest Hannah of Halloween Town coming in for a very fun Halloween hangout. And then for episode 2, I had on my friend and Gothic author, among many, many other things, the all around Renaissance woman, Andrea Dean Van Scoy. So we had some really great conversations, and I look forward to having more amazing artists and authors and content creators on here to just have even more great conversations, because that's really what makes a lot of this stuff fun. That's what makes doing this kind of thing a lot of fun. And one reason why I do it, it's because, I love getting different people's perspectives on things. And I enjoy I enjoy conversation with people, and I especially love conversations with other creatives. So yeah, but I just look forward to having more guests on, and there will be a few solo episodes with just me, where you just get to listen to me ramble. But it's going to be a lot of fun. And I'm really, really excited about where this could possibly go. And I decided for this third episode just to give you a little bit of a background on what exactly Tiffany's After Hours podcast is and why I decided to do it. Now, before I get into that, I do want to give a shout out to a cool candle company, like I sometimes like to do on my episodes. If you saw my Sleepy Hollow haul, you'll see that you probably saw my unboxing of this lovely Harvest Moon candle by Earth and Offerings, and their website is earthandofferings.net. This is a very gorgeous candle for an autumn night or even a winter night. It has top, middle, and base notes, which most things of most things of fragrance do. The base notes are vanilla, plum, and cedar. The middle is orange, peel, and violet, and then the top are dark cherry and cinnamon. I can definitely smell the dark cherry and the cinnamon. So yes, so this is the beautiful Harvest Moon candle that I got at the Sleepy Hollow Festival from Earth and Offerings. And again, their website is earthandofferings.net. Very, very beautiful candle. And so I am burning it while I am doing this podcast episode. So that's kind of a small business shout out, because that's one of the reasons why I do this. I do love to give independent artists and independent companies shout outs, because they're just amazing, and they do amazing work. They keep a lot of the integrity behind the art alive. And and I just enjoy just seeing what people can create, just basically out of nothing, without any type of factory behind them, what people can create in their own homes. I am always just very, very fascinated by that, which brings me to the story behind Tiffany's After Hours. Okay, so when I was, so those of you that have been following me for quite some time know that I also do music of the Gothic, Celtic, and fantasy nature. Some like folk, some folk rock, folk metal as well. And also that I am into living history, reenactment, and that I am a huge history buff. So some of you might already know that about me, and that I do also have another podcast called Bonfires and Castles, which I do cover a lot of history and like Celtic and fantasy themes. So I was doing that for a good couple of years, and and I was having a lot of fun doing it. But then, um, you know, there were some artists and businesses that I wanted to cover that didn't quite fit into that genre. So I started to kind of think about, how can I also, help lift these friends of mine up. Now, I did have the After Hours YouTube channel because I did, as I was reorganizing some of my stuff on my music pages, I was also kind of moving some stuff over to what was just going to be a vlogging page, which ended up being Tiffany After Hours, because it's me after hours, after the music, after the historical outfits, after just all of like, music gigs and things that are music and, living history related. It's me and my other interests. And it still is kind of that. But at first, I started my After Hours YouTube channel like, this is going to sound bad, but not really taking it too seriously. Like it was just for me, just going to be a fun vlogging channel just to have on the side of my Gothic Celt stuff, my bonfires and castle stuff. And, it was just like kind of like one of those things I was like, if only two people watch it, oh well, I'm okay with that. This is just going to be something fun. For me to maybe share some of my other interests and maybe just re-upload some videos that are like some blast from the past that don't quite fit on the Gothic Celt website and my Bonfires and Castles podcast. So I was starting to do that, and and it was fun. um and I kind of kept up with it off and on. I wasn't, like I said, it wasn't really a huge priority for me. But when when it started to get closer to Halloween, when I started, seeing like the code orange in the stores, and then I also attended a like a behind the scenes tour at the haunted attraction Castle Blood, which if you watch me or listen, I do pimp Castle Blood quite a bit because they're good people. um I went to their was kind of like a halfway to Halloween behind the scenes tour, and I realized just how much I actually really miss like making that part of what I do. And because I had stepped away from it for a bit to focus more on like music and then I really got involved with the living history scenes. But let's face, I'm a spooky girly at heart. That's never going to change. That's always going to be a big part of me. And I did feel like I was kind of neglecting part of myself too when like I was still, going out and, and having fun in those kinds of things. But yeah, I just kind of felt like, I was shutting part of that away a little bit for the sake of branding and for the sake of, even making other people happy. But you know what? But this is part of who I am too. I love the Celtic stuff. I love the fantasy stuff. I love the living history stuff. but I also love, what I'm doing here too, which is, paranormal talk, urban legends, sharing some, like a lot of the horror authors, and then just, having discussions about that, doing film reviews, book reviews, other than historical, other than, of the historical nature, which I love, and I love a good historical drama, a good historical movie, but I love just the fun stuff too, the fun, horror films, and just, and like some of like the other kind of more like dark fantasy stuff. So I just, as I was doing my just, as I was just kind of having a little bit of fun with the After Hours vlog, I asked, when I went to the VIP tour uh, at Castle Blood, the behind the scenes tour, I think it was I want to say it was back in July. Um, I asked Ricky, the owner, if I could interview him. And I wanted to interview him on my Bonfires and Castles podcast, but I knew I would have to wait for like a Samhain, episode. And that was the thing too. Like if I wanted to, because some of my friends, who are, horror authors, sci-fi authors and filmmakers, and, I I would have to wait till probably if I wanted to put them on the Bonfires and Castles podcast, I would have to wait until like maybe Samhain to try and make them fit into the Bonfires and Castles theme. And I didn't want to do that. So I was already kind of like, especially when I was at the VIP tour for Castle Blood, I already kind of had this idea churning in my head, and I was, just kind of thinking about, will I have that after hours vlog? I wasn't doing it too serious, but, maybe I might want to like resurrect, pun not intended, but resurrect something there with, with me, you know, writing and doing some stuff for, like the more alternative and, kind of, in a little bit of horror genres, and the haunted attractions that I also love, and paranormal discussion, and, just all of those things. And so when I interviewed Ricky, it was kind of like an experiment a little bit, because I was going to put it on the Bonfires and Castles podcast as like a special Samhain introduction to Samhain episode, and then I was going to put the video on the After Hours channel, um, and just kind of see where that went, and then also help promote Castle Blood in the process. Um, so I did that, and then shortly thereafter, I became a media ambassador for Castle Blood. And by this time, I was, doing my After Hours channel a little bit more seriously, and I was really trying to see what I can build with it, just beyond, okay, this will just be my occasional fun vlogging channel that I don't care if only 2 people watch. So I was, really just trying to, just thinking, okay, I could do something with this that's separate from my Gothic Celt and Bonfires and Castles stuff, that's separate from the music, that's separate from the living history. Every once in a while, I can, kind of cross post and interweave it. I don't know if that's a word. But every once in a while, yeah, I can do that. But overall, like, this After Hours thing will be its own thing. And then I became like a media ambassador for Castle Blood. And then I was just kind of like, that really got the creative juices going. Like, okay, yeah, I really could and should do something with this, because as much as I love like the music and the Celtic stuff, the fantasy stuff, the living history stuff, and will I'll always, I'm not going to leave that. I'll always be a part of it. I'm still a part of it. I'm very active in it. Um, but I love this stuff too. And, and I wanted to do both, like full force and just have, like I said, just have them be their own separate pages. And yeah, so so then I was just like, okay, yeah, you know what? I am going to do this seriously. So I focused on creating my 31 days of Halloween for the page, as well as, starting to post my movie reviews for different horror and suspense films that were coming out. I reviewed The Conjuring, Last Rites, and just movies like that. I started just really experimenting with it and, seeing where things can go, because I did write for some horror publications too in the past, and it was a lot of fun. And, and this is a lot of fun. This scene's a lot of fun, and there's a lot of really good people in it, a lot of really good artists and good authors and, musicians and stuff that, like I said, may not necessarily fit on my Bonfires and Castles podcast, but they could totally fit on this. And, that's one thing I love to do. I love, just helping promote people's stuff. I love lifting people like that up. I love lifting up independent artists, and, I just love, talking about the unknown and the unexplained and urban legends, and, and I can do a little bit of that on my history pages, but not to the same depth that I can do it on here. So, so then, I was doing more with the YouTube channel. People were, leaving some good feedback, and, the subscriber count was starting to grow. So I was just like, okay, I might be onto something here. Um, and then I was like, and then I created the new podcast page, and I wasn't sure at first when I wanted to launch the podcast. But I decided to then, okay, I'm going to soft launch the the After Hours podcast. I will soft launch it on October 1st. I put the interview I did with Ricky as the first episode, even though I already had it on the YouTube channel. I put an audio version up as the first episode. And there were a few, I also uploaded a couple of interviews, like audio versions of interviews that I did for my 31 days of Halloween. Kind of did that as a soft launch for the podcast, and then made my official launch on Halloween with Halloween Town. And then in the process, I also gave the podcast its own Instagram page, because why not? I figured, hey, if worst case scenario, nobody follows, but people started following, and and people started to really like what I was like where this was going. And and there were some people that were also following me on my other page, my Gothic Kelton Bonfires and Castles page, that also did follow me onto the After Hours podcast too. And then there's some that I do think just prefer the other stuff, and that's fine. This is, kind of like getting its own little momentum. So yeah, but yeah, that's basically the story behind, it's the origins of the After Hours podcast. And yeah, I just thought that would, before I, talk about other things and bring other people on, I just wanted to, explain and talk a little bit about, yeah, the origins of this podcast, and yeah, and how much I'm looking forward to doing it. And I did put my Bonfires and Castles podcast on hiatus throughout the month of October, so I could focus on building this, and also so I can focus on freshening up the Bonfires and Castles podcast too, because I felt that, it was time for that to get a little bit of a revamping as well. And in doing this, I actually started to get some cool ideas to really freshen up the Bonfires and Castles podcast. So overall, like this ended up being, woo, almost knocked my microphone, but but overall, this ended up being a really good thing. And like I said, I'm really looking forward to seeing where this can go. I'm looking forward to just some of the really great discussions that are waiting to be had. And I'm looking forward to, seeing where my other podcast, the Bonfires and Castles podcast, can go, especially, like I said, doing this really helped me with just we're seeing some possibilities with that too, because I did do a vlog video on that, how I just kind of felt the format of Bonfires and Castles was a little bit stale, so I needed to give it a little hiatus, walk away from it for a little bit, maybe focus on this and some other songs that songs that I need to finish writing, and then come back to it. And that looks like it's shaping up to be it was the right thing for me to do, not only for myself to fulfill this side of me, this side of like my whole artistic self-expression, but also for the good of keeping my Bonfires and Castles podcast, just from kind of getting to where, where it was starting to feel like repetitive. I have some pretty cool ideas for that now too. So, like I said, in many ways, this helped with it. So, yeah, but that's the story behind the After Hours podcast and how it's actually helping my other podcast too. And I was really, really grateful when I saw a surge in downloads for my Bonfires and Castles podcast while it's on hiatus. And as of this recording, it's on hiatus, but by the time this airs, it'll very likely be back. But and also just how many downloads that, kind of like the pre-launch episodes of this After Hours podcast got. And, and it was it was more than I thought, actually. And I was just really, really grateful for that. And again, it was kind of like confirmation, like, okay, there's obviously, a demand for this out there. There's an audience for this out there. So, yeah, but I'm really excited to go on this new little adventure. And, my 31 days of Halloween was a lot of fun to do. And I'm thinking of doing in December on the YouTube channel, 25 Days of Christmas. So we shall see about that. But yeah, this was kind of a shorter episode because my conversations with Hannah and Andrea, I could have been talking to those two forever. But this is going to be a shorter episode. And, yeah, hope you enjoyed it. Hope you enjoyed listening to some of the origins of how the idea for this podcast came about and how it kind of slowly developed from just being kind of like just a fun on the side vlogging channel to really being its own thing now. So it's always interesting how stuff like that works out. Sometimes it's the stuff that you really don't plan on doing too much with that really seems to like start to grow and take on a life of its own. So don't rule anything out. That's the moral of this episode, I guess you could say, is don't rule anything out. Just because you never know where something can go. If you have an idea, just start it. Just start doing it. It doesn't matter if you don't have the whole thing fleshed out. I didn't have this whole thing fleshed out. In fact, there's still stuff that I'm planning out. But you know what? But if you have this idea in your head, even if you don't have, like I said, even if you don't have the whole thing fleshed out, even if you don't even know if you have a full vision for it, just start where you're at. Because you never know when, your creativity might start to flow, and then you'll get just just this whole new idea and this whole new fun thing, and, just something else that like people will actually enjoy. And, and then I guess that's what I'm trying to say, don't be afraid to just start on that new idea, even if you don't have it all figured out, because I certainly didn't have this all figured out. So, um, but yes, but don't be afraid to try that new creative idea. And, you know, and kind of like one principle that I heard that, some people, some really good creatives like to go by, and people that I really admire. It's ready, fire, aim, which means just start where you're at, and then you can always tweak things along the way. So just leaving that little message in there for you. And yeah, so hope you enjoyed this episode. And just, yeah, if there's anyone you think might enjoy this episode, or the podcast in general, feel free to share it with them. And if you're maybe also interested in some history, some Celtic and fantasy themes, yeah, check out my Bonfires and Castles podcast as well. So, and even check out some of my music if Celtic fantasy and Gothic music might be up your alley. So, all right, so this was episode 3 of the not the Bonfires and Castles podcast. What am I saying? This was episode 3 of the After Hours podcast. I wonder how many times I'm going to mistakenly say one when I mean the other. I don't know. We'll see, but it's okay if I do. But yes, this was episode 3 of Tiffany's After Hours podcast. Thank you so much for listening. I will see you in episode 4. I have a new episode every Friday for the After Hours podcast, and for Bonfires and Castles, it's every Sunday. So it's kind of like you get to kick off your weekend with the After Hours podcast. And then you can wind down your weekend with Bonfires and Castles. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next episode. Until then, stay spooky.